What's so serious you pulled us all from the throes of pleasure, Dick? We was celebrating. Buck and Baker, hell, that's 2 down, Billy said. Yeah, only a few dozen more to go, Doc said. That pep you got, kid, is about to fade, real quick, Brewer answered. We took out Morton and Baker. And McCloskey, don't forget McCloskey. Last thing we're gonna want to do is remember that, I promise you. Cut to it, Dick, before our girls get lonely. Shut your mouth, Brewer exploded. The room fell silent. This ain't funny. When you gunned them boys down, we wasn't law no more. What are you talking about? Doc asked. Our deputy status had been revoked, McNabb replied solemnly. Revoked? By whom? Axtell, Brewer replied. Billy looked around. The men were all trading worried glances. Is that all? The kid finally asked. Is that... He's the goddamn governor. So what? He's as crooked as any other ring rat and everyone knows it. Don't matter who knows it or don't know it, Brewer replied. Doesn't change the fact that what we did can now be considered, strictly speaking, murder. I say we kicked dust to Mexico, Doc said. McNabb agreed. It's the smart thing. I can learn Spanish, Big Jim French said. You'll fit into Mexico about as well as you would a lady's carriage boot, Billy replied. We've stepped outside the law, Brewer responded coolly. McSween can't protect us. Justice of the Peace Wilson can't protect us. And John Tunstall can't protect us, Billy said, 'cause we let him get killed, and if we scurry off now, tail tucked high, then he died for nothing. He already died for nothing, Brewer answered. Then go. Spend all your days letting others step on you and take what's yours, but me? Nah, I'm done running. Lincoln County, New Mexico Territory. Sheriff Brady woke early. His head was throbbing, and it was only made worse by the pounding on his door. It's Pepin, came the voice from outside. Brady sighed and opened up to find his deputy out of breath. Them boys never made it to Lincoln. Brady shrugged. Morton and Baker. Brewer's gang was taking them to Lincoln to face charges for the Tunstall thing. Hindman saw the group yesterday heading into Agua Negra. The Tunstall thing, Brady thought. He knew Justice of the Peace Wilson had deputized Tunstall's employees, including that shit-heeled turncoat kid Billy Bonney, to go after the men who had slain the Englishman. Brady was one of those men. But things had changed in the last 24 hours. And Hindman didn't think to stop them? He was by his lonesome. 1 man against a dozen? Besides, they'd been deputized, too. Current affairs ain't your specialty, is it? Brady replied. He reached into a bucket of water he kept by the bed and pulled out a rag. He didn't care it was soiled from a week's use and draped it over his eyes. Those regulators ain't law no more. And if something happened to Morton and Baker, well, they'll have to answer for it. Sheriff, Dolan's insisting we do something. Brady grunted and wiped the dirty rag over his face, then coughed last night's phlegm into it. Then I guess we better go look for them. An hour later, Brady, Pepin, and Hindman reached the bodies in Agua Negra Canyon. Pepin dismounted his horse, and Hindman did the same from the coach of the wagon. Brady eyed the sun, still rising. It was only March, but the days were getting hotter earlier. What do you suppose happened? Pepin asked, peering over the 3 dead men lying by the dry river bank. Flies were hovering, and an animal had taken a chunk out of Baker's thigh. Maybe they was trying to escape, Hindman suggested. See them hands? Still roped. These men were assassinated, Brady said. As Pepin and Hindman began loading the bodies into the wagon, Brady looked back up at the sky. It was heating up indeed. While Brewer hightailed it for the hills to tell McSween and Deputy Barrier what had happened, Billy had another idea. It had taken some convincing, but he finally persuaded a few regulators to head into Lincoln and talk to former Justice Wilson themselves. After midnight, when the town had quieted down, Billy, Frank, McNabb, Big Jim French, and Jose Chavez were standing in Wilson's living room. Wilson's wife served them tea, and on her way out she whispered to her husband, "Don't your friends ever do things normal?" "They aren't my friends," Wilson said, for all to hear. "They're former deputies who don't have the first clue what sort of hell they've conspired for themselves." He turned to the regulators. "You know your deputy status has been revoked." Billy casually dropped onto Wilson's sofa. "Yeah, by that screw of a governor, Axtell." "Screw or not, he's within his rights to do it." "And what say the people?" Billy inquired. "What people?" "Not the scumfish on Dolan's payroll, the everyday folk around Lincoln." "What's that matter?" Big Jim French asked. "Axtell's only as powerful as his favor." "This ain't one of the states," McNabb replied. "Votes didn't put Axtell in power. He was handpicked by President Grant himself." "You done much reading about the governor?" Billy asked. The men had not. "Before ruling over this little fiefdom of New Mexico, he was governor of the Utah Territory." "So what? All that proves is he's liked by Washington." "That's one view. Another is he lasted but 4 months before being run out by them Mormons. How many more chances a man like that get? See, if public sentiment turns on the dear governor, he'll be cast aside again in shame, and President Hayes will have no choice but to remove him and install a governor with no ties to Dolan, Catron, or anyone else in the ring." "You're talking a political game," Wilson said. "A gamble, really." "What's life if not a gamble?" "Except you lose this one, you don't walk away broke. You don't walk away at all," McNabb replied. "Wilson, just tell me this. Which way is the wind blowing?" Billy asked. "You out of town, if you're lucky," Wilson answered. 6 feet deep if you're not." It wasn't daybreak yet when Billy and the regulators left Wilson's home. The town was still asleep, and the men could slip out of Lincoln undetected. Then they heard a bark. Tunstall's Australian shepherd, Hackney, was standing in the middle of the street, wagging his tail at the familiar men. Billy started toward the canine. "Damn it, Billy, let's go," McNabb said. "We best be gone before sunup." "We at least gotta bring him back," Billy said. "Come on, boy." Billy playfully jogged toward Tunstall's house across the street, and Hackney followed. The other regulators reluctantly followed, their eyes scanning Lincoln for any sign of movement. Billy brought Hackney to the small corral behind Tunstall's home. Billy got to one knee, laughing as the dog licked his face. McNabb and French were the first to see it. "Shit, get down," McNabb said. Billy and the regulators ducked behind the wall of the corral. Sheriff Brady was walking down the middle of the street with his deputies, Pepin, Hindman, and Long. Tagging along was Billy Matthews, another member of the boys. "What are they doing up so early?" French asked. Billy peered through a hole in the stone wall and watched Brady and the deputies make their way to the courthouse. They seemed in a jovial spirit as Brady removed a paper from his jacket pocket and read it aloud. "Let any and all who can hear know this. There is a warrant for the arrests of Richard Brewer, William Kid Bonney, Josiah Doc Skurlock, Charlie Beaudry, and others for the murder of upstanding citizens Buck Morton, Frank Baker, and William McCloskey in the Agua Negra Canyon." Brady made a big show of nailing the proclamation to the courthouse door. Then the men turned and walked back west through town. They would pass right by Billy and the regulators. "As soon as they're gone, we'll dip out back to the Rio Benito and slip away," McNabb said. The other regulators nodded. But Billy kept peering through the hole, watching Brady and the deputies getting closer. His gaze was locked not on the men, but on what was in Brady's hand. Billy's Winchester, the one Tunstall had gifted him. The gunshot rang throughout Lincoln and right through Brady's chest. Billy fired again. He was standing now, exposed, shooting at Brady and the deputies. French and Chavez followed suit. "God damn it, Billy!" McNabb cried out, but McNabb rose and opened fire as well. The fusillade from the regulators scattered Brady's men. Hindman caught a rifle shot in the neck and tumbled over, bleeding out in the Lincoln dirt. Matthews and Pepin made it to the orchard across the street and lay flat on their bellies. out of the regulator's view. Sheriff Brady had taken 5 bullets to the body and was groaning in the middle of the street. Acting on pure instinct, he still tried to get to his feet but just slumped over again. Billy hopped the wall and approached him. Jim French followed, gun aimed at the orchard for any sign of movement. Billy looked down at the sheriff, who was gasping and moaning. "Shoulda, when you was the boys," Brady struggled. "Yeah, but you didn't." Billy picked up the Winchester rifle Tunstall had given him. He turned it on Brady. "Just so you know, the gun that ended your miserable fucking life came from John Tunstall." Billy pulled the trigger, snuffing William Brady out for good. Gunshots ripped out from the orchard. Billy instantly felt the pain in his thigh and dropped. Big Jim French did, too. The other regulators opened fire, but the assailants were gone. Billy slid over to French and helped him to his feet. "Look at that," he said, showing their matching bullet wounds in their thighs. "You ain't funny," French said through gritted teeth. Billy wrapped French's arm over his shoulder, and the two limped to the Tunstall store. Once inside, French collapsed to the ground. "Can't go no farther. Just gotta get to them horses," Billy said. "We'll get fixed up in San Patricio." French chuckled. "You one of them, ain't you?" "One of who?" "The touched. The blessed. The type who attract the ire but never have to reap the consequences. Bullets whizzing all around, and you get a mere scratch." "A scratch? I'm hobbled too, but you ain't bleeding like I am." Billy looked down and saw there wasn't an exit wound. "The bullet was meant for you, but lodged in me," French continued. "How long until Dolan men come bursting through that door?" "When they do, all they'll find is an empty room." Billy lifted up the hatch to a secret crawl space below the floor. French looked at him. "I'll send Dr. Ely, I promise," Billy said, then locked him in. Chapter 27. Agua Negra Canyon, Lincoln County, New Mexico Territory. Billy settled into an obscure nook in the Agua Negra Canyon, a spot that gave him a vantage point both west for anyone trailing him from Lincoln and east, lest one of the boys, the Kinney gang, or the Seven Rivers Warriors were making their way into town. Billy had an uneasy feeling in his gut, one he couldn't shake. Maybe he was haunted by the look of surprise on Brady's face as the bullet ripped through his chest, or the gurgling sounds Brady made just before Billy closed his eyes for good. No, it weren't that. Billy had killed before, and he certainly had no love for the sheriff. Brady had been part of the convoy that killed Tunstall. Brady had tormented him in the pit, made him miss Tunstall's funeral. Brady had stolen his prized possession, the Winchester rifle. But something still gnawed at Billy. Something had changed. Not just on the outside, them being wanted men now, but inside. Would Mama even recognize him anymore? Would Josie? No. "I'm different now," was the last thought he had before drifting off to sleep. "Darling, I am growing old. Silver threads among the gold shine upon my brow today. Life is fading, fast away." The horses sprinting toward the thick trees, picking up speed, faster and faster. "But, my darling, you will be always young and fair to me. Yes, my darling, you will be always young and fair to me." They reach the dense forest. Branches and thorns slice and cut Billy's hands, his arms, his legs, his face. Blood trickles down from his rib cage, warm and sticky. Then a deep, heavy, thunderous crackle splinters the back of Billy's head into a million tiny pieces, as if time has slowed to a crawl. The small fragments of his skull float lazily, drifting ever so slowly away into the sky. His surroundings, the trees, the branches, the thorns, even the horse under him fade and fade and fade into a bright light until all he can see is a blinding white. Billy woke. He was dizzy and nauseous. How long had he been asleep? An hour? 10? It was dark now. Judging by the moon and stars, it was late. Time to ride back into Lincoln.